funny when I like struggle now and get myself in a bad situation. I'm like, I'm the fuck off fun girl. Like it went viral to millions of people. And I feel like a hypocrite. And I yell at myself, I'm like, you're a freaking hypocrite. And I'm like, you know what? The reason I wrote that essay is because I struggle with this. The reason I struggle with this is because I have ADHD. It did not cure my.
You are listening to My Rejection Story, hosted by Alice Draper.
I am joined by Paulette Perhach. Paulette and I share something in common. We're both big advocates of sharing our failure and rejection stories. In fact, a section of Paulette's About page on her website is titled Failures, Humiliations, and Rejections. Here are some of my favorite snippets from this section. Paulette Perhach's writing has been rejected from some of the nation's finest publications. Of her writing, Tin House says, unfortunately, we must pass at this time. Another brilliant snippet reads, she's proud to say she has only dropped a laptop in the bathtub once. She has overstepped her welcome while chatting with Roxane Gay, knocked over a tea tray during a talk by Nancy Pearl, and told George Saunders she loved him while passing him in a plane. But with all of that said, embracing rejections is probably Paulette's superpower because she also happens to be an award-winning writer, author, and writing coach. You may have heard of her when her groundbreaking essay, A Story of a Fuck Off Fund, went, as Elle put it, super viral. Or you may have heard of her from her book, Welcome to the Writer's Life, which was published in 2018 by Sasquatch Books, part of the Penguin Random House publishing family, and selected as one of Poets and Writers' best books for writers. She's also written for countless well-known publications like the New York Times, Vox, Elle, The Washington Post, Slate, Cosmopolitan, Glamour, and Marie Claire. Paulette, welcome to My Rejection Story.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me. That was my favorite pronunciation of the Fuck Off Fund. That's how I'm saying it from now on. The Fuck Off Fund.
South African accent going in there. So based on your website bio, it's extremely clear that you're no stranger to talking about rejections. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, was this always the case? Did you always embrace rejection or failure?
No. And well, it took living in a place where I got the chance to meet other writers before, kind of the curtain was pulled back. And I was like, wait a minute. I was like, nobody sounds as cool as their author bio makes them sound. Nobody looks as good as their author photo makes them look. Like, what are we all doing here? And so that really became a big part of my message because people who don't live in big cities or have the chance to live near an organization that gathers writers, they don't get to see behind that curtain, So I really wanted to pull it back and be like, listen, a lot of great stuff's happened, but guess what it took to get there?
Yeah, I love that so much. It sort of sparks off so many things. And I think also having been in the writing community and the entrepreneurial community it's even worse in the entrepreneurial community, at least that I've seen, because I learned a lot about rejection from writing that I kind of now transfer into a more entrepreneurial space where I'm like, you don't understand, like writers talk about rejections. We have to. It's the only way we can get our stuff out there. Whereas, people who are coming from, maybe they worked in corporate for many years before starting their own business, that rejection muscle hasn't been built in the way that we've had to build it as a writer. So in your book, when you describe your own early writing process, you say, I put my butt in my chair or hammock, as the case often was, and put words on the page. I failed again. I began again. I failed again, began. And then you wrote, I began to begin over and over and over. So I think you demonstrate what many people would describe as a beginner's mindset. And I think it's the most powerful tool that any creator can have. Mm-hmm. Can you take me back to Paulette at 26 years old? Kind of how did you navigate that period of starting, kind of creating when it's often quite unrewarding in the beginning?
Yeah, I'm so thankful to my teachers, and I can being a teacher and being a writing coach can be very vulnerable because it's like, well, am I the best writer ever? But you don't have to be the best writer ever to help other writers. And I think we're all teachers of each other and all students. So if I didn't have someone, didn't have the books that I found. The first books I found were Bird by Bird and The Artist's Way, which is such luck in our little Peace Corps library. And so I was blessed to be told this is exactly how it's supposed to look, and so I trusted that this is exactly how it's supposed to look. All your job right now is just to write a ton and write badly. And the challenge with that time when you start to get serious is you're like, okay, I'm going to write a lot and your writing's going to be terrible. And then you're like, I'm going to read with more intention and I'm going to read better and better people. And so the delta between your work that you're producing and what you're reading now is huge. And it just seems so insurmountable. And so just having those guides was so helpful for me. And I think, it's funny to talk about your rejections and failures, but also like that is what I want to give to the community, to be like, this is totally normal, by example. Say, this is totally normal. Yeah. Writers get rejections all the time. Writers write crap all the time. Writers write cliches. You just edit it. You submit it somewhere else. You rewrite it.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that so much. And I think speaking of the sort of the teaching elements, I haven't read Bird by Bird, but at least in the artist's way, a big part of that is output. You're doing your 3 pages a day. You're creating regardless of what kind of external validation you're getting from your writing yet. And I think that the biggest mistake we may see for a lot of people, not just writers, is thinking you have to get things perfect before you can start creating the thing. And I think we learn a lot of these things by doing it, start writing regardless of it.
You get better at the thing by doing the thing. And I'm the queen. It was so funny because during that time I was also learning Spanish and the indigenous language Guarani. And I wanted to sit at home and study the books because that was less vulnerable than going out and just trying to have conversations with people and messing up. And I still can have that tendency to try to do the less vulnerable, but also the more distanced thing. For example, right now, my novel is about 20-year-olds and I'm 41 now and I'm terrified to get it wrong. And I'm like, let me just lurk on Reddit. I'm like, I just need to talk to some 20-year-olds. But I'm like, if I'm around 20-year-olds, I'm going to feel old. And they're going to look at me like I'm old and I'm going to realize I'm old. And, but I'm like, no, you're doing the thing where you tried to learn Guarani from a book and everyone's like, just go talk to people and listen.
Yeah. I mean, it's easier in some senses, to use Reddit or to stay at home, but you definitely will learn more from going out and talking to people.
Yeah.
It's hard. It is vulnerable. I think it's a great way of putting it. So when you did a writing course at Hugo House, this is also something you write about in your book. You describe feeling like an imposter in a place you wanted to call home. And I love that because, I have this belief that if you're not putting yourself in rooms where you feel like an imposter, you're probably not pushing yourself. You're not stretching that comfort zone. So I want to know, did any part of you kind of know that when you were, going back every day? Because it's also something you wrote in your book, because you returned every day in spite of feeling an imposter. Is that why you kept showing up?
Yeah. I think, being human is just more and more, our perception of the world, our perceptions of ourselves, it's so malleable. And I'm a little obsessed with how we'll never truly know the truth, But that is also a real freedom where whatever you think about yourself, that is a story you've been told, and you can kind of rewrite that story. And even a whole history of being one kind of way can just be the kind of, you can have a moment that's just like the fulcrum of totally changing you in the other direction. Like I used to struggle with organization so terribly, and that became the reason I developed a software for writers to stay organized. And now people are just like, oh my gosh, Paulette, she's so organized. I'm like, because I was like a monster. I couldn't figure out anything. So if you've been really frustrated but wanting to write your whole life, you can just consider that like a kind of engine that pushes you forward toward being like, well, now I'm going to do it. And isn't that a beautiful thing that I'm making that switch?
Yeah. And I mean, I think it also goes back to that, what you said earlier about learning languages. we can either tell ourselves a story that we can't do this hard thing and it's too late to learn this hard thing, or we can throw ourselves into the deep end and do the hard thing. And you talking about now not being organized makes me think, which is my next question. You wrote an article for the New York Times about managing finances with ADHD. And so I'm guessing the organizational stuff is you building that tool, that writing tool to help people keep organized was probably a tool you developed to help manage your ADHD and be more organized. So yeah, something that really stuck with me in the article you wrote was you describe getting a diagnosis later in life for ADHD and how it felt like someone had handed you a map to a mental landscape that you'd been lost in for 4 decades. I also recently got diagnosed with ADHD, although I suspected it was there for a long time. And I have this belief that my ADHD is part of the reason why seeking rejections came to me a lot more easily than it did for my peers. Because
seeking rejections,
yeah. I know that's kind of an antithesis, but I say that because I was exposed to a lot of micro rejections, but I think, as you said, we don't know the truth, but this is my story. When I look at it, kind of what differentiated me, but I was exposed to a lot of micro rejections growing up where I was always criticized for being too messy or too disorganized or too lazy. So I never had this kind of perfect image to maintain, which I noticed with people who had that perfect image is it's a lot scarier to put themselves out there because there's something to lose. There's a lot to lose. Everyone has kind of framed you as this person that's perfect and does things right. And I didn't have that. So I think pitching myself and just generally putting myself out there was easier. So having read kind of your story and you have your own journey with ADHD, I wonder if you what your thoughts are on how ADHD has influenced your relationship with rejection or embracing failures.
That's so interesting because there's the two sides of it. There's like a rejection sensitivity dysmorphia that people with ADHD have. And you're right. I mean, I think I feel that more like socially, like if someone's mad at me, I'm like, oh my God. But I think also with ADHD, you're so right in that we're not succeeding all the time. We're failing a lot in a lot of ways. And so you're kind of used to it in that way. I was actually working on a piece about how ADHD made me a good traveler. And I learned this when I traveled with someone who like always had her stuff together. And then we were in South Korea and she's like, I can't understand what's going on. I feel lost and confused and I just need to go back to the hotel and like chill out. It was just taking too much of her brain power, which I get. But I was also like, oh, like lost and confused is kind of home base for ADHDers. And so I was like, I've been lost and confused all my life. I'm totally used to this. Like I could go all day. So in that way, it made me a good traveler. And I could totally see how in that way as well, it makes you someone who's willing to look silly. Because if you are very type A and you have it together and you're a high achiever, you lose sometimes that muscle of I'm willing to look silly. I'm willing to look silly a lot. I love trying new things. And anytime you travel, you're going to look silly. And anytime you try something new, you're going to look silly. So it does help, I think, that ego from kind of being created in the first place around fully having it together and being perfect.
It's so interesting, the travel, because I think about it actually, like I have traveled with type A friends and we navigate things very differently. But what I'm also thinking, as you were kind of talking there, is the rejection sensitive dysphoria is like with myself, I could see that playing out socially, which you just mentioned as well. I can see it playing out in the sense of like, I would never, for example, tell a crush that I had a crush on them. I would see other girls like share things with each other, like you say what's on their mind, and the threats of being socially rejected felt like the scariest thing in the like whole world. Yet making a fool of myself to strangers never felt that scary.
And this is how ADHD can just manifest in different ways. So I have friends who hyper focus on money. So they're very good with money and have very high wealth. I'm like out of control with money. So I'm like, it's such a struggle for me. And I just want to be like, yeah, like impulse control is my issue with money. However, with like people I have a crush on, the impatience comes into play with ADHD. I'm like, all right, what's going on? What's the deal? What do you do? What are your friends? What are you doing? Actually, like my neighbor in Peace Corps, I would like had asked him, we were like flirting, and I tried to ask him in Spanish. I was like, vamos a ser amigos or vamos a ser más? And he was like, so I said, like, are we going to be friends or are we going to be more? And he was just like, we're friends. And then he was like, oh, I guess so. Yeah, I don't have, so that's where I think ADHD can be so mysterious to people where it's like, wait, are you hyper-focused on money? Or are you like, are you too scared to be rejected to ask guys out? Or are you too impatient to not? And so it's just a wild world out there in our brains.
It's a wild world. I really want to get my brain scanned and just like study kind of how I respond to certain things.
Just monkeys in there swinging from trees.
Yeah. And the money thing, you wrote, I mean, your essay, and I never really managed to get enough information to find out, but I saw some people, your essay, the Fucking Fund essay, was that a personal essay? I know it was written in second person.
Yeah, it was kind of a fictionalized account of some things I'd been through. And so it was, kind of real life rolled out with a rolling pin and fictionalized a bit. And so it kind of, it's kind of a weird genre. It's one of those, it kind of sits in the middle of a few different genres. And so, but yeah, I know what that all feels like. And it's funny when I like struggle now and get myself in a bad situation, I'm like, I'm the fuck off fun girl. Like it went viral to millions of people. And I feel like a hypocrite. And I yell at myself, I'm like, you're a freaking hypocrite. And I'm like, you know what? The reason I wrote that essay is because I struggle with this. The reason I struggle with this is because I have ADHD. It did not cure my ADHD. Like I just finished Matthew Perry's memoir. Being on Friends, having $80 million did not cure his addiction issues, right? So I wrote it from the experience, and that the piece of artwork that reflected that went viral did not cure my like core problem, Yeah.
So how do you navigate it now? I'm curious. And also just for people listening, the essay is essentially a story of a girl speaking in second person about graduating and getting income, and kind of her lifestyle increases with the income she makes, so she never has a safety net, she never has a fuck off fund. And when things go badly in her life, she has an abusive boyfriend and a boss who is harassing her. She's stuck, she can't leave, she can't move out she can't leave the boyfriend because they're living together. She can't quit the job because she needs a salary. And then you do a kind of rewrite of how it could have looked if she had lived a lot more conservatively, been a lot more frugal, and had built that fuck off fund and had the ability to say fuck off when things got bad. So yeah, on kind of the topic of rejection and things, because I think this is very valid, and I think that a lot of people build a name and something, that's something you became known for, is this essay. Some people might become known as perhaps something you experienced being a writing coach, or, if I talk about like how to pitch yourself and then I'm getting everything wrong, there's a lot of feelings of feeling like an imposter or fraud when we become known for something and we don't have it quite right because we're human and humans don't get things quite right. So yeah, I'm curious to know kind of how you're navigating that money, creating the fuck off fund now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of self-compassion and just talking about it openly, just being like, I don't have anything to hide. I'm a real person, and really the diagnosis of ADHD really helped, because before that, it's like, why can you not do this? And the thing about ADHD is, and I did my like there's like this Colby test of your personality, and I have such an entrepreneurial spirit. And, I've been bootstrapping a piece of software for 4 years. So I pay a developer out of my freelance writer's salary, and so kind of like my and this is, I think, a big thing that writers need to think about, is we build up these assets. And I'm 41. Like, my friends have some serious, like, liquid and real assets, right? My assets are my writing life, my brand, the draft of my novel, my software, my reputation. And that can be really hard because I can't have people over to come swim in my reputation or my brand, or I can't, drive around in my fancy software. And it's not very obvious, and it doesn't feel real yet, but it's like, I'm in those days when, the entrepreneur is sleeping on the floor of the office in order to make something bigger happen and making big bets. I still do, diversify. I have a 401k or like a, Roth IRA, where it's like, okay, even if I'm not putting every single thing into software, because that's just not how startups work, and so I totally believe in myself and totally believe in the Writer's Mission Control Center. And I know that it is this piece of software and that it's a startup and that's risky. So I also have a 401k where it's like, if I really needed cash, I could dig into that. And I'm so appreciative of my first job in college, my first part-time job, for helping us start retirement funds, which was the last thing on my mind. So what I want from this podcast is for one person to email me and say, all right, I started putting $5 a week into a retirement fund, and set a reminder every quarter to increase it by $1. That would make me feel good.
Well done for setting that up. And I mean, you say you don't have assets, but you do. You've set up your retirement fund, which is more than I think many people. ADHD is so fascinating because, like, now that I've been, like, I don't know, I've just kind of been obsessed with it, and also how it goes back in my family, and I see the way it's played out with my father and my grandmother, not my grandfather. And I mean, on that finance thing, my grandfather set up, not knowing that my dad had ADHD. He wasn't diagnosed back then, but just because my grandfather was very organized and thought about things, he set up a like retirement life insurance kind of weird investment thing that existed back in the days for my dad when he was like 18, that my dad paid like a very minimal amount throughout his lifetime, but amounted to a significant amount later on. And that's something that, as knowing someone like my father who was terrible with money and thought that more money would solve all of his problems, which, as you said earlier, more doesn't necessarily make things better, would never have done for himself. So I think like automating things or kind of finding those easy ways of managing finances is a great strategy. Makes me think I need to go put more money into
Yeah, and I think getting external help, like I just totally redesigned my coaching programs to be like a 360 degree, I'm calling it the finishing school for writers. It's like, you can't just, if you have trouble finishing things or you have ADHD, like you need someone there every step of the way. And you need, body doubling, working with someone, you need guidance, you need advice, you need someone who has like some real accountability on you. And so like working with a financial coach is really good too.
Yeah, body doubling is huge. And it's funny because you like notice that you had built these tools without even realizing you built these tools of like ways to cope with ADHD, like co-working and stuff. So yeah, I like 100%.
Yeah. So I have my group called A Very Important Meeting, and we meet at 10 o'clock Eastern in the US. And, people come from all over the world, which is so fun. And I lead a meditation and then we write together for 45 minutes every day.
That's awesome.
It's great.
Yeah. Yeah. My God. And I'm sure that's a great way of getting things started. I don't know what it is about external accountability that plays such a big role.
Yeah. It's a great way to get things finished too. That's what I noticed, is like people are actually completing things in there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fantastic. Do you know that I give away a copy of every author who comes on this show's book? All you have to do to enter is subscribe to the podcast, review it, send me a screenshot at media@hustlingwriters.com and tell me which book you're entering for. And I might just be mailing you a copy of the book, but also you're helping me grow a show that I am so passionate about, so delusional about. I wanted to be on Times Square. I want to be interviewing the biggest and best authors, and I need all the help I can to get there. Your subscribe means the world. Your review means the world. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And let's resume with the episode. Shifting gears a little bit to a piece I read that you wrote in HuffPost Personal. You wrote a chilling and moving article about being on the receiving end of infidelity. Mm-hmm. You described that this connection as initially feeling extremely safe, mm-hmm. and the person was consistent, caring, and committed to you. Until you got a text, which you write in your essay read, "Hi Paulette, I know you don't know me, but I just got off the phone with the guy I've been seeing for the past month. Apparently you have also been seeing him." Mm-hmm. I mean, reading that felt like a sucker punch in my stomach, so I can't imagine what receiving that text felt like for you. And yeah, I mean, infidelity is one of the worst forms of rejection we can go through. Can you take me back there and kind of, if that experience changed the way you viewed sort of putting yourself out there?
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of, and you can read from the first line, like that was on top of a much bigger rejection and deeper mm-hmm. rejection. This guy I wasn't deeply in love with him, but we dated for 6 months, and mm-hmm. he turned out to be like, so one detail I think that's really important in the article is that the other woman was in a marriage with a cheater, and she got breast cancer and decided that she wanted something real. So she left that marriage. She's like, if I'm going to die of breast cancer, I want something real. And this guy was the first guy she dated, and he knew that story, and he took her hand and looked her in the eye and said, "You'll never have to worry about that with me." Like, that aren't sociopath behavior. So like whatever he did to me, I'm like, oh my God, I feel so much worse for you. Like, holy crap. That's a horrifying situation because I'm a very trusting person. I'm not a guarded person. And so, man, yeah, I'm actually just working on a piece about this right now that like stay soft, refuse to die was the bio of this other woman, my buddy. Yeah. And, who I still keep in touch with. And so, yeah, so I mean, to be an artist, you can't armor up. And that's a constant practice. And, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Sorry.
I'm moving to New York. And so it was funny. I had an experience. I've been going to New York for a startup leadership program all this year, once a month for 6 months. I had to be in New York, and I actually went on a date in New York knowing I was going to move there. And the guy offered to drive me to the airport. We'd only been on one date. And I was really scared to like offend him, but I was like, I need like a link to your LinkedIn or something. I'm not getting in a car with someone. So like a place like New York, it's like you have to protect yourself and stay open. And that balance is really hard.
Yeah. That this idea of staying open, I mean, I would imagine, if we go back to that HuffPost essay, that I'm also a very open, trusting person, and I think that something like that would make me question my judgment hugely going forward. So how does someone stay open? How do you stay open? How do you stay vulnerable? How do you remain this open, vulnerable writer when you feel like you've kind of been sucker punched for doing this?
Yeah, that's the thing about life, about having 40 years of it too, where I think you have to acknowledge the dangers. There's this thing called the Stockdale paradox, where you simultaneously hold faith in something, but also confront the brutal realities. And James Stockdale was he was a POW in the Vietnam War for 8 years. Wow. So the optimist would be like, everyone's nice, everyone's going to be great, you can trust everybody, right?
Yeah.
The pessimist is going to say you can't trust anybody. And the person with the, who's embracing the Stockdale principle is like, there are sociopaths and murderers out there. I'm going to, I'm going to ask for at least a LinkedIn profile. And, and I mean, when I was deeply in love, I remember saying to my mom, like, he could leave me. Like, wow. Like, I knew how bad it would hurt. And it did when it happened. But that's life.
Yeah.
And like, you can pretend you're not living life, or you can say like, this is going to hurt. But it's also just going to be the very thing, and when you're in the very thing, it's all worth it. I thought a lot about that movie with Jim Carrey. What is it called?
I don't know what movie.
The one where he's, oh my gosh, it's got like a very melodious title. All right, we're going to have to do a little pauseroo. Jim Carrey.
Dumb and Dumber, Liar Liar, Man on the Moon, Bruce Almighty, Ace Ventura.
It is... My phone's in Spanish, so it's giving me the name in Spanish. I've thought a lot about that movie, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Mm-hmm. And would you choose to forget if you could forget? And... yeah. So, yeah, I don't know. You gotta, like, you can tap out if you want. You can tap out and just sit around and watch TV and, drug yourself on your drug of choice, whether it's scrolling or, actual drugs or alcohol. And that's just the armored up life is the less than life. It's less than the real thing. And, a lot of people have had a much more brutal time than I have. And I think in the striving to stay open is in the striving to be human.
Mm-hmm. It also makes me think there's got to be an element of feeling what you went through. Because the armoring up, whether that's scrolling or taking substances or something, is stopping yourself from really feeling what's happening, which I think can make it hard. Yeah, you've sort of barriered yourself from being open to new experiences or putting yourself out there in vulnerable ways again.
Yeah, I'm actually presenting about Brene Brown's research in my personal essay class tonight, and came across her research about how you can't selectively numb. Yeah, you can numb everything, including the joy and the love, or you can be open to everything, including the pain and the grief.
And I think that there is a natural human inclination not to feel pain or not to feel grief. Yeah. And sometimes we kind of have to go through that period of denial in order to reach that stage where we're truly feeling it. If I think of myself, which also leads to another question I wanted to talk to you about, but my father has late stage dementia now, but in his early stages of dementia, I was in denial for a few years. Like, it took me a few years to reach that point of like, okay, I'm fully accepting what's happening and I'm going to process this loss. And I've seen it happen to people I care about for other things. There's kind of a period of numbing, and but it's also that you have to feel it to grow from it and to kind of be on that other side and experience whatever transformation you're going to get from that period. Yeah, so in I think it was in your book, what I love about your book is it's so much more than a guide to writing, because there's so many great stories in it. And you talk about losing your father, I think, quite young, and you write, "My dad's death fire polished my nerve. Once I decided to survive it, it made everything else seem survivable." And I think it's such a powerful way of reframing something awful. And you also put into words something that I hadn't really been able to put into words. But what I find more fascinating about your story is that you once viewed yourself as emotionally and intellectually hobbled because of various traumas you'd experienced in your upbringing. So that shift from seeing yourself kind of as a victim to, I guess, I would say a victim to survivor, or this now a tool in your kit rather than something that's holding you down. How did that shift happen? What did it mean for,
Yeah, I struggle with that a lot because I was very angry that my dad died.
How old were you?
17.
Okay, yeah, so you were actually fairly old. You definitely processed the gravity of it.
Yeah, like I could definitely understand it.
Yeah.
And, I think learning about growth mindset, I love Carol Dweck's book, Mindset, and I didn't read it till later in life, but that was so helpful. And, there's a quote, you think you have problems, that you're like the only person who experiences problems. These problems are this sadness. And then you read and you're like, oh, okay. And joining Peace Corps was a big part of that too, where I lived in South America for 2 years with probably what I would consider like the global middle class. And just being like, suddenly I had always felt like, oh my gosh, my family was so broke and, we were so messed up. And then suddenly I feel like I have to kind of tone down. Oh yeah, I had a car. I went to college, and man, there's so much profitability in our victimhood where people want us to feel like we need to be more and more. And I still struggle with that. Like I was like, oh, good, Peace Corps, I'm enlightened. And then it totally like wore off coming back to the US for 10 years now. Gosh, more now. But
take me back to that. What do you mean?
Like just really having a full understanding that like in my love for my host mom, who I still talk to and adore, if I'm going to complain about my life, it is such a dishonor to her, who has worked so much harder for so much less rest and luxuriousness, And I do want to pursue things on a material level, like, traveling, which is my favorite thing in the world, to experience new things, see other cultures. It's on the other side of money. I have to earn money. So if I want to see a lion in the wild, if I want to experience that state of awe, I have to be able to buy the plane ticket, So I'm not saying that I'm not pursuing a higher level of income. I am. But pursuing it with a spirit of like, I choose to dedicate my life to making a really big impact so that I can get these benefits because it's an option and I appreciate that an option, not the world owes me this. And in a state of victimhood, I feel like it's the world owes me. And getting out of that was really important. And I also, after my dad died, a terrible anxiety, and found out that I had generalized anxiety disorder, but it was really hard to parse that out from the grief of his death because he died in an accident. So thinking at any time my phone was going to ring and someone was going to be dead, and like, it was like that all felt like a natural response. And then feeling like, oh, well, we went bankrupt when I was 8 and then my dad died and now I have anxiety disorder. Like, why me? Why me? Why me? It's like, why any of us? And so acceptance, and that's where spirituality has played a really big role in my life. I'm very appreciative to people like Tara Brach, Eckhart Tolle. I love learning from people who are like, accept. And I kind of just like, if you could just like have a meditation on at all times while you're walking around, that would be great for me. Like I get in one, and it's so funny because I lead meditations in my writing group, and then I just tweeted recently, like, driving in New York has me sounding less like someone who leads meditations and more like someone court ordered to attend them. Like, I'm definitely like, I think people get into spirituality because they're very spiritual naturally, or because they need it real bad. And I am of the latter. I'm like, somebody help me. So it's been such a wonderful tool, and that has, and it's a practice. Like, being alive is a practice, and then we're going to die. What? I don't know. That's the deal. And then maybe there's parallel universes and there's robots, and like, I can't keep it all straight, but I try.
I love that so much. So what I'm hearing is that when you started Peace Corps, so back then you viewed yourself more kind of in a victim, as a victim of your circumstances, your parents going bankrupt, losing your father in an accident. And there was a big shift in kind of seeing the way people were living in, where was it again? Paraguay?
Yeah, Paraguay. Yeah.
And then is that when you started your sort of journey towards, I guess, growth mindset, meditation? Are these tools that you immediately started using, or did it take?
Yeah. I mean, first I had to hit like pretty much rock bottom.
Yeah.
I had bought a house with some money I got after my dad died. And then that was like being short sold. And because it was like the recession. So I was basically like losing the inheritance that I got because my dad died.
This is 2008.
Yeah.
Like 2008. Yeah.
2008. No, this was like later. I went into Peace Corps in 2008. This was like 2010, 2011. I moved to Seattle. I was like waitressing, but you know what? I really was dedicated to like self-education. I was learning, I was studying, and this was such an important lesson for me. So I was reading all these books about getting a job. I got a job. I was like, I need any job. Like I no longer was like, I'm a reporter. I had been a reporter, and then I was a creative writer, and then I was like, I just need a job. And I got a job offer to write proposals for a like smaller unknown tech company. And I told my boyfriend at the time, I think I'm going to negotiate. And he was like, are you kidding me? Like, you are desperate for this job. And he worked in healthcare where you don't negotiate. And I was like, no, like I've been studying. I've been reading all these books. I think I should negotiate. And I asked for $5,000 more, and they offered me commission. And that was $100,000 difference over the next 3 years.
Wow.
I paid off all my student loans. I listened to a personal finance podcast every day on the way to work. And then I finally, for the first time in my life, had money in the bank. And well, in the first time in a long time, since I had had some situations that I couldn't afford to get out of that inspired the Fuck Off Fund. And I could see then the difference that money in the bank would have made in those situations. And so, so that inspired the F Off Fund. And that's why I love talking about, you know, business and personal finance with writers, because we need to be smart about it. We can't afford to just coast on this stuff. So if you're freelance writing, you need to negotiate. Like, can you imagine? I would not have even known what that cost me if I'd just been like, you know what, you're right. I need this job. I'm not going to negotiate. Yeah. So that's the importance of self-education and continuous improvement, and the importance of knowing your worth and asking for it.
I love this so much. I mean, it's something that I really appreciate about the writing community. I was exposed to was the transparency around rates, negotiating. Alone, without that transparency, I never would have negotiated. The first time I sent an email negotiating my rates was like, you know, fingers trembling, like, I can't believe I'm sending this. And it's not something I would have sent if I didn't know that other people were doing it and that it worked. And I mean, negotiating a writing rate over email is like the quickest couple $100 you can ever make.
Totally.
It's just one email that you're sending.
You know, business people are expecting you to negotiate. The first thing they quote you is with the expectation that you're going to ask for more.
Exactly. One of my clients, because I work in PR, one of my clients is she's a leadership coach, but she used to work in HR. And she always says, you know, when she's coaching clients and stuff, that as an HR person, she expected people to negotiate. Like that was, because I think we attach so much emotion to the money thing. We think that they're, you know, going to think we're greedy or asking for too much or something. And on the other end, there's a person who, this is literally what they're expecting. They're not giving you, usually not offering you their highest budget.
Yeah.
But at that point, when you negotiated that writing job that, you know, your boyfriend at the time told you, are you crazy? Like, you need this work. I think something that when it comes to negotiation, a lot of people are scared of negotiating is when they feel like they don't have a fallback plan. You know, it's very easy to negotiate when you got a lot of money coming in, or you're secure, you have a safety net or whatever it is, you know, you don't need this job. So, you know, you can walk away if it's not a good fit. But for people who don't have that and they're like, oh my God, I need money right now, it's very hard to negotiate. What would you say to that, kind of being able to navigate that?
Well, if you're like, I'm truly desperate for this work, just knowing that, number one, I recommend having something where you can get work today. I call it your adult lemonade stand. I have before went out on like Mother's Day with my good camera and offered to take family portraits in a park. That was my lemonade stand.
So epic.
And other than that, when you negotiate, someone should not rescind the offer. If they do, that is toxic behavior. What they should do at worst case scenario is apologize that they cannot offer you more. Best case scenario, they give you more.
Yeah, I love that you put that. I mean, that's, essentially, that if you're negotiating and they say no, you're losing something that would have been toxic. I think you can kind of agree it would have been toxic. And if you're so desperate that you need that toxic gig, that's the only situation I think where you shouldn't be negotiating, and hope and look at that as temporary. Kind of look for other alternatives of making money as soon as possible.
Yeah.
What was I gonna say? Yeah. Okay. Just trying to think. I think we went through the questions, but usually I feel like there's questions I would love to ask you, so I'm wondering if I should ask them. For writers, because this is, you're a writing coach and this is what you wrote your book about. And I'd say you put in many, many reps and hours to be an expert in teaching writers. The writers who don't know where to start, what would be kind of the three main starting points, especially if you're crippled with a sense of imposter syndrome or scared of putting yourself out there?
So I like to think about how small tribes used to be, about 150 people, and how in every tribe needed a storyteller. And I know that I was afraid to not be the most. I'm like, what if I try to be a writer and I never win the Pulitzer? It will be humiliating, right? And just knowing that living the life in itself in a place of admiration is in itself a thing of beauty. So I love to sing. I have a terrible voice. I sing in my car. I sing while I'm cleaning. I love, love, love to sing. No one needs to hear it for me to love it so much, right? And if you love to write, that is a different thing from I need people to read this and love it. In the off chance that you are as terrible at singing or as writing as I am at singing. Now, I think probably if you have a love for it and you feel compelled and you know yourself, you have some talent. So just start to read and fall in love with the ultimate act, with the ultimate product of people's work, and to say to keep as close as possible to the feeling that it gives you inside, what the work of other people gives you, and faith that you could do that for others on whatever scale. I mean, the first things I remember writing are letters to my best friends when they were visiting other best friends during the summer, so they would not forget me. I had to be really cool, and that was a single serving piece of art. And write your partner a really amazing love letter. Start doing these little tiny projects. The first thing I did when I wanted to be a creative writer in Peace Corps is I signed up for the talent show, which is in front of 200 people. And I was like, what have I done? I had 3 months and I wrote a satire. It was a scene from a romance set in Peace Corps where everyone's really gross. Yeah. And it was we just listened to it again. I'm like, this was a little racy. I really went for it. And then just don't, the mistake that I made was I made the mistake of thinking that I was, okay, I'm going to start writing. I guess I'll be discovered. So better start putting out those submissions to be discovered and figure out if I can do this or not. But you won't know until you put in years. So I wouldn't submit for the first 3 years if I could do it over. I would work for 3 years writing and then start submitting. That's me. That's my opinion, but that's what I think.
And work for 3 years writing, like keeping it all private? Like, how would you sort of structure that so that you have a goal?
Maybe doing some open mic nights. Like, I love having what's called a fake out in my life. So these are fake stakes to get you writing. For me, it was that talent show. It can be a blog that you promise you're going to put something on once a week. It can be, I go to open mic night every month, a class, a writing coach, anything to answer the question, what would happen if I didn't write today? Because the answer is usually nothing. So filling that in. So those are my 3 things: reading a lot, writing a lot, and having some kind of fake out. Someone waiting for your work.
I love that so much. It's interesting. I've never heard the advice of not putting it out there for, or not pitching in places for a while.
The way that I feel about it is that it was a waste of my time to try to get published. I should have just been in writing school, right? Like, it's kind of like going to college and then getting a job. I wish I'd been like, I'm learning to write. Now I am a practicing writer. Just from, I think also.
What did you study? Sorry.
Oh, I studied magazine journalism in school.
Okay.
And
so
then I got 3/4 of an MFA in fiction.
Okay, yeah.
And so, yeah, I think also when you're kind of new, the places that you know to pitch are the top tier publications. You're like, I guess I'll send this to the New Yorker. I know the New Yorker. Well, like you don't know the whole landscape of the millions and billions of small little publications. So I don't know. I'm sure you could get a guest on here tomorrow who's a fabulous, well-established writer and be like, what should you start doing? And they're like, write things and send them out, right? And that's with everything.
I mean, that's kind of what I did.
Yeah.
I was pitching myself in university. I was impatient to get published, and by the time I graduated, I had collected bylines, which none of my classmates had.
That's great.
Which gave me a lot more confidence. And I did get a lot of rejections. I pitched and I set a rejection goal to get 100 rejections my first year of freelancing. But I also got published in places that I was proud of, like HuffPost and Vice.
That's great.
But I guess there's lots of.
I mean, I'm also going to a wedding in October with a friend whose like mom died, and she was like dating, right, going on first dates right after her mom died. I was like, "Do you want to wait a little bit?" And then she's marrying one of the guys. So maybe I just give terrible advice. I don't know.
I think at the core of it, it's that we're different and that things work differently for different people. And I imagine, like I mentioned, that whole ADHD thing, being resilient to rejection. If I wasn't me, those rejections may have really knocked my self-esteem to the point that I didn't pick up a pen again, because now I have enough evidence that I'm a bad writer and I shouldn't be writing. Whereas, like if I'd trained more and having that personality type, then I would have been a more skilled pitcher from the get-go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Life is a wild animal. I mean, that's the thing about strategy. In business, in dating, in writing, in any area of life, there are just different ways to do it. So experimenting, seeing what works, I don't know.
Experimenting is a big one. Yeah. So, Paulette, I want to thank you so much for your time and vulnerability. I have one final question, which I ask every interviewee. And that is, as an aspiring author, if I wanted to set a big, bold, and audacious rejection goal, what would you recommend?
I would say sending something out once a weekday. Every weekday, just send a submission.
Awesome.
Yeah.
A submission to publications?
To a publication, or I mean, agents are a little more involved, but I might do one a week. But just like doing more than you think you have to get it done. I like to ask people and ask myself, what if I gave you $1 million to do it? Like, what would you do then? Right? If you're like, I want to be a successful writer. And I'm like, what if I gave you $1 million to be a successful writer? You're like, well, then I would get up at 5 a.m. and start writing. It's like, okay, well, like, it seems like you know what to do.
That's how you're going to make that first $1 million.
Yeah, it's like, it seems like you know what to do. So what's going on, right? It's like an amazing clarity exercise. So, if you had a big goal for publication, like what would you do if I paid you $1 million if you got it? I'm like, oh, okay.
It's very, and also I think you showcase the power of having a vision. I don't know if you've noticed this, but many successful people often have this very delusional looking vision about what they want to do. And when you're early on in that phase, it looks insane to everyone, but that's often how you get things done.
Yeah.
So set that $1 million book deal vision. That's kind of what I'm taking away from this. I know we didn't speak about this, but I want to quickly hear your book deal. How did you get your book deal?
So after the Fuck Off Fund, I wrote a book proposal and I sold a book, and they weren't the same book. So I had a financial memoir that I wanted to write, which I still want to write. And I think the timing just kind of has to be right. I don't know. I don't think I have the end of the book. I don't think I've lived the end of the book yet. But Sasquatch Books came to me and they said, you know, do you have any books that you've been thinking about? So we took a course that I wrote for writers and turned it into a book. So the course itself was 50,000 words. And then I added 25,000 words of like my own personal writing memoir on top of it.
Wow. So they approached you.
Yeah.
Amazing.
During my little 15 minutes of fame. It was great.
That's fantastic. So yeah, looking forward to the financial memoir, looking forward to the upcoming novel. Paulette's book, Welcome to the Writer's Life, is on Amazon and many local bookstores. You can also get in touch with Paulette if you're looking for, I think, maybe classes or writing coach help. And I'll be giving away a copy of her book, Welcome to the Writer's Life, to a listener who subscribes and reviews the podcast. So yeah, you just need to email screenshots to media@hustlingwriters.com. And yeah, the instructions and the link to Paulette's book will be in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time, Paulette.
Thanks
I really
for having
appreciate
me.
having you.
It was so fun. Thank you, Allison.
This was My Rejection Story, hosted by me, Alice Draper. Thank you for listening to today's episode of My Rejection Story. I hope this conversation was as fun as I had recording it. I enjoy every episode. So just a reminder that you can win a copy of the book every single week. I do a giveaway of the author I interviewed. So if you love this conversation and you really want to grab your get your hands on a copy of the book, please enter the giveaway. All you have to do is subscribe and review the podcast and email me at media@hustlingwriters.com. And if you've already done it, you can do it from another app. And if you've already done it on all your apps, you could also just borrow a friend's phone, do it from a friend's phone. And let me know, like, on the screenshots that you did it on a friend's phone, because the more reviews and subscribes, the more likely I am to grow the show and make this podcast even bigger and better than it is, perhaps even get some funding, be able to invest money back in the show and really just deliver on my promise to you, which is to make this as good as I can. So I just want to say a huge thank you quickly to my team, Christina Child, Samantha Dubé, and Chechofacho Ndabane. This show would not be here if it wasn't for them and their tireless work and belief in this mission. And then a huge thank you to the distribution partners. So there are some amazing people out here trying to get the word out to their networks, and also people that I think you will find extremely helpful, because if you want to write a book and get a book out there, these are experts in book writing and book publishing. So a couple of writing coaches who are highly recommended in my field, Emily Tameo Maher, Lindy Feel, Tracy Stewart, and Javasia Harris Bowler are all highly recommended writing coaches. And I know so many people who have used writing coach, and it's really helped them get the word out there and get the book out there and not just stay stuck in that draft phase. So their details are all in the show notes. And then also Nick Courtwright is the CEO of a hybrid publishing house, which is an interesting way of publishing a book, and it's highly recommended. Many of my clients have gone through it with great success. You can find out all of Nick's details in the show notes as well. And if you have any questions about them or need their contact details because for some reason you can't find them, pop me an email. And thank you again for listening to the show. I'll see you next week for another conversation. And yeah, have a great Wednesday.